How's everybody doing this afternoon? Pretty good? Everybody ready to get out of here? Get out in town for a little bit, right? We'll try and make this as painless as possible. So, my name is Steve Scarbourgh. I'm from IntelliGenesis. I'm based out of Maryland. I work up at Fort Meade. I'm a senior technical lead for my company. I'm also a senior SIG dev analyst. And today we're going to be talking about the Internet of Things and the cross-connect between it and CEMA, right? How many people are really interested in IoT? How many have IoT stuff at their house? How many people touch IoT stuff every day, whether they know it or not? Right? All right, so we're going to talk about it. We're not going to get superly over technical about anything. I want it to be kind of a discussion about where we see in IntelliGenesis and in some of the places I've been working at and everything else, the cross-connect with IoT and some of the issues and where the touch points with CEMA and some of those other things are. So let's get started right here. So like I said, we're going to do a little IoT primer, right? We're going to talk about what is IoT, what isn't IoT, and we'll get a little bit into the tech behind Internet of Technology type stuff. And then we're going to get into the other part of it, right? IoT and CEMA, right? We'll discuss where IoT fits in and affects cyber operations, some of the touch points and the effects of electronic warfare, and also for the spectrum management operations that go on, and talk about some of those things that are going on there. And also some future needs, right, where I think we need to be looking at across the entire spectrum of IoT, not just with CEMA, but maybe even other places like Navy operations and Air Force operations, stuff like that. Sound cool to everybody? Also, if you can't tell, I do talk really fast at times. If I blow past something and you want to talk about it, just shoot your hand up. Say, hey, can we stop and talk about that? And lots of questions. I got 2 slides. We got less than an hour. No, I got more than that for you. Right. So, quick little background on IoT. When we think about IoT and Internet technology, it gets kind of confusing nowadays when we introduce things like SCADA, Industrial Control Systems, ICS, personal electronic devices, and things like that. Really, we're going to focus in on some of those things, those cross-connects, but IoT specifically. Really, the first IoT stuff came on and started being discussed and thought about in the 60s, early 70s. The first ones were used for industrial control systems and managing pieces like power and stuff like that throughout the industry. In 72, Theodore Parascovage, I always screw his name up, sorry about that, develops a sensor for monitoring systems, right? There's 2 things that came out of that, and that's the earliest monitoring system for power usage in homes. And also, the byproduct of it was the number recognition for dial numbers, so caller ID. So from his information, he came up with those 2 things. The one everybody knows about, caller ID, the other one being the IoT devices and monitoring our power and stuff. Early 80s, companies started really experimenting with interconnected devices and everything else. Everybody in the room looks kind of old enough to remember the Jetsons, right, from the 70s. Right, so that was really probably the first introduction to kids and adults at the time about IoT devices, the robot maid, the robot vacuum, food makers, all those different things. They were already talking about those things in the public and really bringing it to fruition started in the early 80s after the development of the sensors stuff. First company was CocaCola. Anybody know what CocaCola did? Any ideas? They had a machine, a Coke machine. They would actually record the temperature of the device, the inventory of the device, and report back to Coca-Cola those aspects. Before that, you had to send a Coke delivery guy out or gal out to the machine, see how much inventory was there, was the machine functioning properly, how often was it being used, all those different things. With the implementation and development and deployment of this Coke machine, they could report that back. Coke machine didn't need to do that, or Coca-Cola didn't need to do it any longer. They could just simply sit back at a control office and watch their machines, right? Or the vendor that was operating can watch the machine, and the machine would tell it when it would need maintenance or it needed more Coke or whatever product was being served in it. So they filled that in the early 80s. 90s, everybody in here remembers the 90s, hopefully. Right, hopefully. I have some guys I work with that weren't born until the 90s, so a lot of them don't remember it. Really, that's when the internet really started exploding, right? Late 80s, personal computers were coming out. They were super expensive. But the 90s was really when the cost of things started declining and the access to the internet was really ramping up. .coms were exploding all over the place. We had the .com bubble, all those other things. And that's really when companies start looking at, and we start really ramping up personal computer devices and additionally IoT devices. We didn't know it at the time, but that was like a byproduct of one of these things, right? We knew we wanted laptops and PCs in every home, or Apples, right? But we also knew all these other crazy things because we were coming up on an age where the kids who are watching the Jetsons were saying, hey, I want to make a robot, or I want to do these other things. So how can I push this forward, right? Early 2000, we hit a kind of a crossover in the early 2000s of people on the internet versus devices on the internet. And there was actually, in the early 2001 or so, there actually became more devices communicating with each other on the internet, throughout the World Wide Web and everything else. Then there were humans that had access to it, right? We had more devices on there. So it really kind of started the tipping point there on coming out with IoT devices. 2007, another fun milestone there, right? Apple introduces the iPhone, right, and really jolts the whole community forward, right? Before then, we had flip phones, and everybody from the 90s can probably remember beepers, the flip phones, so an iPhone. Really incredible time to be, a young adult. Really scary time for older folks, because they're like, what the heck is this? But iPhone and Apple really pushed forward the whole concept of bringing all that information, giving you access to a bunch of different things right in the handset, and also having a device that can do other things besides just play music or just make a phone call, right? If we think about now today, we're controlling things with our phones, right? I can call at my home, or I can dial into my home, get on my apps, open my garage door, right? The Internet of Things, right? Giving us access to those pieces, right? The first really commercially successful IoT device came out in 2010, and that was the Nest. Everybody have a Nest at home or something like a Nest? A couple of us. It's really nice, keeps my bills down. It's really annoying though when it's hot and it won't let me turn it back up right away, because then it screws all my dynamics up in my house, right? But that was the first one that people really started seeing. It's kind of expensive, but now the market has been, I wouldn't say flooded, but it's stabilizing out. There's enough devices out there now to bring the cost and get people into it. I was just at Best Buy earlier today, and I think Alexa devices, the Echo Dot, is like $39 now. You can hardly buy 4 or 5 Starbucks for that, depending on how many kids you have. So the Nest came out. And 2014, the next big advance that I think really drove things forward was Alexa. Siri had been out before then, but really, I'm not the biggest fan of Apple mobile devices. It's just an iPhone, but Siri would only let you do things with the Apple device, right? It was really locked down. Apple keeps everything kind of pretty tight. Alexa, though, was the first one to allow us to have access to the API and really drive home the ability for all of us in this room, Sunday day hackers and script kiddies and professionals and wannabe software developers to go out and build things and access that API and build things. They actually allow us to build in skill sets so we can teach Alexa what we want it to do, so you can do a bunch of other things, right? And on top of that, Amazon has released things like their dots. Anybody have any of their dots, the clips at home? Seen those? You tie it and you say, you want this to be tied, and you push the button next to your laundry room. Dash button, sorry. Dash button, and next thing you know, you've got detergent at home. You can reprogram those, right? So a bunch of different things throughout the world. What do we have surrounding us as far as IoT devices? There's tons of things, right? There's even little things in this room that we don't really think about could be, an IoT device. The thermostat that's obviously not working right now is having some problems, communicating someplace, right? Light bulbs, environmental control systems like the thermostat, personal fitness devices. How many of us have Fitbits on? Fitbit right there. GPS devices that are on our wrist. Apple Watches, seen a couple of them right out there. So those types of devices, right? We don't think about those as being, true communications devices or IoT devices, but that's what they are. They're linked up to our phones, they're linked up to other things in the environment. They're taking in environmental information and doing stuff, right, to help us, track our fitness and track our phone calls and our different things throughout the day. Refrigerators. Anybody got a smart refrigerator at home? Right? Taking pictures of inside of your refrigerator for you when you're at the supermarket and you say, do I have milk? You hit the button and it will take a picture of what's inside your refrigerator, right? Point of sale systems. It used to be you had to type in everything, right? Go to a cash register, pull it down, a drawer would open up. Now we use cards, and some of us don't even use cards anymore. We've got the cards loaded into our mobile devices. Just swipe it over a device and it reads it. That device can interact with other people too. If I want to share money or Bitcoin with somebody, I can transfer money from my mobile device to your mobile device just by getting them simply close together, right? And that information is spread throughout different places. They've even got Bitcoin ATMs now. Has anybody seen a Bitcoin ATM? It's pretty cool, also really scary. Right? Smart TVs, medical devices, and medical devices we'll find out in a little bit later. That's the one that really scares me the most when we start talking about CEMA and IoT devices, because in the nature of our business, we're going to be doing a lot of things to try and influence the battlefield and stuff. Separating out those devices from adversarial devices that might be communicating or doing something is going to be even more difficult as we move forward. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But most of our medical devices, personal medical devices, anybody have sleep apnea? I got sleep apnea. My sleep apnea machine has Bluetooth on it. It reports back to my doctor for me. I mean, all these different things. Oxygen machines, pacemakers, all those other devices are communicating back right across the network and doing different things. Embedded RFID type stuff, right? Some of the infrastructure that these devices use. This is not a complete list, but these are some of the top ones we're going to talk about at some length. ZigBee, ZWave. Most devices have some sort of low power Wi-Fi enabling it to them. We have power line communications, or PLC. Anybody ever seen a PLC device? Hopefully most of us have seen one or something. It's cellular. The advancement from 3G, 4 or 5 years ago, to 4G to 5G LTE, and we're talking about in 2030 having 6G LTE and advances beyond that, right? Really, the infrastructure is part of what we're going to be talking about also, and how the cross connects with CEMA apply to it, right? How all these devices are interconnected and communicating to get this information out, and it really becomes a resilient network, right? When we talk about some of these protocols, so the first one we'll talk about is ZigBee, right? There's over 400 companies that are aligned in the ZigBee camp. Right, we'll harken back to the days of HD disc, right? HD optical disc and Blu-ray, and that big fight, right? So there was two primary companies. First one being ZigBee and the IoT. 400 companies that are taking up in it. Main companies are going to be Centrica, ARM, Philips, Comcast, AT&T, right? Some of their devices, there's over 2,500 plus devices that have ZigBee implemented in it, right? Some of those are the Echo Plus, Philips Hues, the light bulbs. Right, Samsung Smart Things, their implementation for IoT devices, and the Xfinity box produced by Samsung, who's got Xfinity at home, right? That has ZigBee implemented in it for communications with other devices, right? So you can use Alexa to control this Samsung box, those different types of things. Operates at about the 2.4 gigahertz band. Anybody know what else operates at the 2.4 gigahertz bands? Wi-Fi, so there is potential for a little bit of interference with it between your Wi-Fi network and the ZigBee implementations of the devices. They share some of that same spectrum, and I guess you can kind of see where some of that might come to effect, like if we're trying to shut down IoT devices but keep Wi-Fi up someplace, we have a problem there in getting some of those things. 65,000 devices in a single network. That's a mesh network, and there is bridging available, so you could have 65,000 devices communicating within each other, and they're a single network, and have one bridge over to another 65,000, and then another bridge over to another 65,000. So you instantly start connecting multiple IoT devices in multiple areas and multiple households as we start increasing the saturation of devices throughout the environment, right? That'll be something else we talk about once we get into the CEMA side of it, right? And it's for security, right? ZigBee does implement 128-bit symmetric encryption. There are some well-known vulnerabilities with this, and one was just briefed, I think, week before last at Black Hat. So it's not the most secure. Most people think, though, when they get a device, when they get an Amazon, Echo Dot or something they put in their home, it's listening to you, but your devices should be pretty well secure. Not really, right? Some kid or somebody else, some adversary or whatever might be coming after you or anything else can exploit those and then gain access into other vectors and use it as a jump point for other things into your house or anything else. So while it does carry some, it is easily defeated. The next one we'll talk about is ZWave, and this is kind of the other hat, right? This is, in my opinion, this is going to be the high-definition optical disc in a fight, right? It'll go away at some point, possibly. But it has an alliance also of about 450 companies, and some of the companies are kind of cross-connected right now. So Amazon Echo Plus also has it, so it can connect to other devices that have it implemented inside. And AT&T has some of their devices that implement it, but it's only because different companies and different devices may only have one of the two. So the bigger companies are implementing both protocols and devices so they can communicate with the smaller company devices and so on and so forth. It operates most of those devices. It depends by country, but most of the ZWave devices communicate in the sub 1 gigahertz range. So in the US, the device works about 908.42 megahertz, right? The transfer rates for it are about 100 kilobits per second. With the ZigBee, they're looking at about 250 kilobits per second transfer rates. So not high data flow, but when you start looking at what they need to do, that's plenty for it, right? In a single network in ZWave, you can have up to 232 devices, and also there is a bridging function for those devices as well. So they have a much smaller network for them locally, but they also can get out and get to other devices. The effective range for these devices too is 30 to 40 meters. For the ZigBee, right, it is up to 100 meters, much like Wi-Fi, 100 meters or so. And again, frequencies are country specific, so depending on what area of operation you're going into or what country your device may not work there, you have to kind of see what all is going on there, right, before you move into the country. And one of the other things I found, doing this research and everything else for this, there's some things like little pieces that kept popping up and I thought were kind of funny. Like, anybody know what the last country to officially receive iPhone deployments were? And what year it was? 2014, it was Serbia. So just 4 years ago was the last country to actually get an iPhone, when it actually came out originally in 2007. That doesn't mean they weren't black marketing and sold, but first official support, right? So little crazy things. Anybody have any questions so far? No? All right. So now we're getting into the fun stuff, what everybody wants to see, right? No? Yes? Yeah. Okay. So CEMA, right? The core tenets of CEMA are this, right? Attack and exploit the adversaries and the enemy systems, right? Build, operate, and defend our networks, right? That we're going to be utilizing in the field. Gain situational understanding for the battlefield commanders, right? So we can see what all is going on. And protect individuals and the platforms that we're deploying out to those fields, right? So there's a lot of different cross-connects and different points that we're going to be looking at now, that the saturation of devices, of IoT devices, of personal communication devices, ICS devices, SCADA devices, all that in that environment, right, is really going to become paramount that we get a grasp on a couple of these IoT type functions, right? right? So saturation of devices communicating. As we go look at some of these environments, right, we're increasingly going to be working, right, and have been working in urban environments. Even in non-urban environments, we're seeing an increase in the uptake of technology. There was a study done about a year or so ago that kind of identified that in some underdeveloped countries, people had access to mobile devices, but they didn't have access to indoor toilets, right? So people are adopting these types of devices and using these in their daily lives to communicate and do things with that we may not traditionally expect them to be there. Does anybody remember the one laptop per child project? Anything else? So the device was a really low expense, developed device that you could give out to developing country kids. They could hand crank the device to power it up. As soon as it came up, it would create a mesh network, and then they would have access to the internet to do studies and whatever they needed to do, right? Some of those things we were giving out, some of those pieces are still out there. They're uptaking everything else. There's an increased risk of offensive use against friendly forces. So the saturation of these devices in environments, right, pose I will call a target-rich environment for our adversaries to take control of them and do things against us. We also have to be able to operate in that environment and use those same capabilities. But segregating pieces out from that are adversarial networks or non-civilian or non-critical infrastructure that we may not want to affect becomes increasingly more difficult, right? The volume of data that's going to be coming in also creates a huge problem for us, right? There's a wealth of information for use for strategic and tactical information from those pieces, right? As those devices are communicating, right, we will be able to use those to our advantage, right, and kind of get in and see what all is going on. But being able to take in all that information, right, to develop that situational awareness for close-in operation support, even strategic or long-term identification of operations or where we can go into, will become increasingly more complex as it grows, right? We have a complex and electromagnetic environment. These devices are communicating on different standards right now. We could have a household full of different devices, and they may not all be communicating on the same thing, but they're all communicating in some way, right? I just moved my son into Penn State this past weekend, and one of the things we wanted to do for him was put up these LED lights in his room, right? So they have an RF interface, they have a Wi-Fi interface that you can get on, and every other room in the entire building we walked out the evening had these lights in them. They're all on the internet. We can control them from any device. We can see what's in the other rooms. And on the campus, the other buildings were communicating. So there's a potential to use these LED light strips to then gather information and also embed something in them to do something to the local networks and stuff, all because the kids want a super groovy room, right? We have to be mindful of those things when we're going into environments. When we're going into an urban environment, what is there for us? What is generating data that we can use for, right? The spectrum management effects, right? What do we do for ourselves and our networks to be able to manage operations and communications for troops on the ground moving forward and backhaul communications for data and for operations, right? So we'll get into each one of the three. Cyber operations, we'll talk about the electronic warfare and also the spectrum management operations as well. So cyberspace operations, everybody's favorite topic, right? Cyber all day, cyber all night, right? Cyber on everything. So some of these things, the cyber mission from all the organizations that we're working with right across the U.S. and our partners and everything else, there's a myriad of different pieces to discuss here, right? We won't be able to even fit that discussion into this entire week. So a couple of the things that I just wanted to point out, right? Operational preparation of the environment. What do we look at when we're looking at going into an environment and really seeing? We have to take into account again, or we're going to have to start taking into account again what that environment looks like for IoT devices. Not just personal devices, but and personal computers, but really what is in that environment, what is being adopted and used in those locations, right? IoT devices in close proximity will form even larger hybrid mesh networks, right? So if we say we're going to shut down this specific building or the specific area of town or do something to it, what do we need to do to fully secure that area from communications, right? What do we need to do to allow communication in specific areas, right? Separating adversary networks from civilian networks, right? How do we shut down, an adversary's Amazon device and not the sweet old lady next door's device, so that she can make sure that her insulin gets delivered to her? Those types of things, right? Denial of use becomes increasingly more difficult, right? As those networks become more open to facilitate interoperability and communications with each other. Who's got Xfinity at home? Right? A few of us. Comcast? Huh? Wouldn't know it, right? So these devices, right? I think it was last year they really came out, right? Or maybe it was the year before. But now they've opened up a channel on your personal Wi-Fi router in your home, on your cable modem, that allows people in the area to see Xfinity Net, right, and connect to it. They're using your bandwidth in your device, to advertise and to get people connected in. That's how they're spreading out their mobile network, right? So it's going to be voice over IP, right, voice over Wi-Fi connection, and now that you roll into a neighborhood who's owned by Comcast, right, that only provides service to them, you'll be able to connect to all these Wi-Fi devices and everything else. Those pieces interconnected with all the IoT devices in your home and your neighbors' homes, interconnected, right, really opens up and allows us to do a lot of different things inside there. Got a little ahead of myself there. Right, defensive considerations against our networks, right, when we're going to operations and stuff, right. We have unintentional insiders. Now, what I call unintentional insider threat, right, is everybody with the Fitbit on right now. Everybody with the Apple phone or Apple Watch, or anybody who brings an iPad or a Samsung device or any other type of device that we're going to have in the future, right? Headphones, those different types of things. We don't intentionally mean to bring them in, but we bring them in because morale issues and different things like that. Those devices will have an impact on not only our networks internal to our operations, but also being used by our adversary, right? We're using devices to track and gain information, insight into our adversaries' environments. They can do the exact same thing, right? Increased threat from sheer number of potential threat vectors, right? With more and more devices coming online, right? A lot of these devices do not have security baked into them. Some of the protocols and everything else do have some very rudimentary protection, like the ZigBee having 128-bit encryption in it, but easily breakable, right? That's not what people are thinking about. That's not what consumers are thinking about when they think, oh, I'm going to get this Alexa device or I'm buying this light bulb. The light bulb doesn't really need to be encrypted, but it needs to be secure in some form or fashion, right? So it can't be used against us, or so we have an idea of what we need to do to take over some of those things to protect us and protect our troops moving forward, right, for situational awareness. The expected growth, right now, so by 2020, they're expecting about 20.4 billion devices on the network globally. By 2030, we're looking at more than double that. And in the out years, we're going to see it increase rapidly as more and more things come online and more devices take over. How many people have, let's say from a 2014 to 2015 on vehicle? A lot of people, right? Anybody have Mercedes-Benz or BMW or Chevy OnStar? Right? It's got 4G LTE built into it. I got a rental car last night, and my device connected right up to the car like that. So now that's an IoT device or vehicles, right? There's vectors we can use with it, and we need to be protected against it, stuff like that. So one of the things also is that saturation of data, right, that's available to us and are available to our adversaries. And I have to tell, I work as my full-time job, right, is a mentor to D&I analysts, right? Trying to get them to understand the volume of data that we're affected with or coming against and everything else. And I like to use Twitter, right? Does everybody know what Twitter is? Yes, everybody knows what Twitter is. Cool. You'd be surprised there are some people I ask that question to and are like, no, what is it, right? Really simple mechanism for communication, right? A little short line, blam, goes out. Anybody know who one of the top people in Twitterverse is? No, most of them are followers. Kardashian's up there. Yep. I looked today just to double check because I always use Kim Kardashian. I wanted to make sure that she wasn't dethroned, and unfortunately she's been dethroned. It's now Katy Perry. She has 106 million followers, right? So if we think about that in network traffic and data volumes, right, what's a tweet? It's one event, right? She tweets something, but it's not really one event. It's her sending her provider one event, and it goes to Twitter. But then Twitter has to then feed that out to all the subscribers and all the followers. So if you have 106 million followers, that means there's 106 million sessions or packets going out throughout the world to get to your devices. If we think about how many devices we have on our daily life, right, at least 2, most likely 3, and sometimes 4, 5, and 6. And if we include now our IoT devices, if I set up my Amazon Echo, right, with my Dot to read me my tweets from Katy Perry whenever they come in, right, now we're looking at even more vectors. So we start expanding out from one tweet to 100 million sessions to 400 million, 500 million sessions every time she tweets something, right? And when you compound that with all the other people on Twitter and all the people on Facebook and all the things going on a network and on the internet, you're looking at vast amounts of data coming at you, right? This drives our data analytics that we're going to need, right? So commercial companies like Amazon and Google don't have to face the same problems that we're going to face with data analytics, right? They have large volumes of data. Google, there's no doubt in the world that Google has a large volume of data coming to it, right? But what is that data? What are they looking for specifically? They're looking to deliver you advertisements, right? And feed you back information and drive you different places. Amazon, has a large volume of information coming to it, but they only really care about getting you to buy stuff, right? We, in this room, right, and in this environment, the operations that we conduct, are worried about all the data. We need to take in all the data from Google and all the data from the devices and all the things that are producing data from an environment, and we need to take it in, right? They can be specific about what they want, but we can't be because our adversaries are not going to be specific about their data, right? They're going to come at us from all different angles, and they're going to use all the vectors at their disposal to get data to and away from us and use that same data against us, right? Electronic warfare. EW types? A couple. All right. We're going to talk really slow now. No. I was in the Navy for 20 years. I was a CT, and I was stationed with a bunch of EWs, and there were a bunch of good guys, so most of the time. So electronic warfare, right? Market is still being established on the standards they're using, right? We still don't know ZigBee or ZWave will be the predominant outcome or winner of the major protocol to use. There are the PLC. There are different, cellular networks are still expanding and doing different things. So being able to specifically say the capability we're going to be able to use in the future, we still don't know, right? Wi-Fi, the LTE market is expanding, right? In 10 years, it might flatten out, or there could be, next week, the way technology is developed in the country and in the world, we might be looking at a totally different way to communicate for our IoT devices. It could be next week, it could be next year, whatever it might be. Preparing for 2 areas, right? Offensive and defensive operations in electronic warfare. How do we deny our adversaries the use of the electromagnetic spectrums, right? While also simultaneously using that with our devices and everything else that we're going to be fielding, right? I was a little set back when I saw the Futures Command was being put in Austin and separated from like Army Cyber because they should be going hand in hand, right? We talk about making lethality of soldiers. They're going to have devices on them. They're going to be using technology and stuff. That has to be built in. CEMA needs to be built in from the very beginning, right, to make those things more effective. Right. Critical infrastructure will be commuting right alongside adversary use of the same spectrum. We'll have our devices and our equipment in the same environments that our adversaries are going to be operating in, using the exact same technology as us. We may have a little bit more advanced armor system than they are, but they're going to be using the same communications mode, the same devices to facilitate attacks and move data around and do the things that we want to try and deny them against. When we start putting our troops in closer to those areas, it'll become increasingly more difficult to be able to separate those two out, right? Spectrum management operations. Any of these guys in the room? None? Oh, man. I was going to give them major props, right? It's not the coolest job in the whole CEMA world, but it's probably one of the most important ones, right? We can have cyber operations do certain things. We can have electronic warfare do certain things. But these guys and these gals and these folks really are going to be the ones that help facilitate the entire environment that we're going to be operating in and help guiding what we're going to be able to do in those environments and really helping separate out some of the noise and some of our adversary communications and use of the spectrums, right, to get at those things. Right? Coordinating the overall use of the battlefield resources ties into previously mentioned capabilities of cyber operations and EW operations, right? Deconfliction is going to be the primary event here that they drive, right? If we have a capability moving into the field, right, what is the environment that we're moving it into, and do they have a majority of those things being implemented and being used in that environment? Volumes of data will tax the backhaul communications and also the field communications. As we're trying to bring data back so that analysts can use that data, right, and we'll get a little bit more into it here in a second, that is going to become increasingly more, right? If we think about the volume of that information coming back as compared to what the volume of information is from a field personnel, right, who may be, on patrol or someplace or from an asset from a helicopter someplace, right? Those types of things, we're going to be collecting and bringing back data from it and accessing data from backhaul locations. We're storing mega data centers worth of information and trying to mash all that up, right, on top of it. I know, when I did deployments on an aircraft carrier, one of the last things to be thought about was, the TS networks. There's a lot of information that flows over that. There's also a lot of information being used on the unclassed network, on the NIPRNet, right? So the bandwidth for that was much smaller than it was for the NIPRNet. Now, if we have all those other IoT devices and everything else alongside of it, that data becomes even more prevalent on the network and chews up even more bandwidth, right, and choking down even more critical and more secure communications that we need to be moving forward with, right? And then friendly IoT implementations, right? How do we embed the IoT devices that we need to fight the future wars? How are we going to put those into our combat troops' hands and peacekeepers' hands and everything else that we need them to be able to do? What are they going to use for their future use? So the spectrum management operations guys are going to have their hands full on that, right? Future needs. Now, these aren't, aren't a complete list of things. These are just things that I thought of while I was going through, and some of the things I've also thought about over the years and stuff, right? For our operators, right? The operators are going to have to be trained and operate within, we train them, and they operate within their specialized fields. We have EWs, we have cyber operators, we have spectrum management personnel, right? When we operate those guys and those folks work in CPTs or cyber protection teams or on-net operations, information system operators, those different things to provide the communications. But it should be trained in other aspects for a clear understanding of how they operate within the entire spectrum of operations. You can't have an operator maintaining the network that doesn't understand cyber defense or cyber operations or even electronic warfare to understand what all is going on in that environment. Special operators. Now, this isn't to say that we need, elite cyber warriors to work with our special warfare folks, but there is going to come a time when I think that we're going to need certain personnel that can do it all, right? Right now, we have large groups of folks that work offensive and defensive operations and work all that together. In the future, the data is going to be moving and the operations are going to occur so quickly that you're going to need operators sitting in the periphery, right, of our information systems in our battlefields that can do both simultaneously and understand the direction of forces with the electronic warfare, the spectrum management, cyber, offensive and defensive, as well as intelligence gathering, right? Those guys and gals are going to have to be able to do all that in real time, independent of having to coordinate with other teams. We all worked in operations where a lot of times decisions and events get slowed down by having to go, well, I can't really go after this event because I got to coordinate with this other team first. And that other team has to coordinate with somebody else. We really need to move them forward and put people at the point that can do all of it, right, with support from the back end. Right. Data analytics, right? This is going to be one of the biggest ones that we come up against. And we talked about a little bit earlier with Google and Amazon and all the other companies that are out there gathering data up. But, right, volume. With all that information that's going to be coming at us and having it available to us, being able to provide battlefield commanders, right, and even strategic commanders in the back end with viable information to be able to make the decision is going to become even more critical. How do we have those folks be able to sit there and take all the information and really go at it, right? We've all heard, data scientists, right? I work with a bunch of data scientists who sit around and try to figure out what data scientists are, right? They're taking a bunch of surveys and they're data science the heck out of it, and they still come back and they're like, what's a data scientist? Any data scientists? Good, right? Not that they're bad people. They just need help sometimes, right? Our analysts are going to need to be multi-talented again, right? We have cyber operations, EW folks, and SMO folks, right? We're going to need them to be able to be more advanced. Our operators in the future, our analysts in the future, are going to need coding skills, C++, Python. They're going to be able to do on-the-fly data visualizations, right? So we can get that information and make it accessible to I don't want to say non-smart people, but a field commander is not going to sit there and go, I don't care what your 5 million rows of data say. Show me a picture of where I need to shoot, right? That's what they're going to need. We're going to need to be able to have those analysts and those people and CEMA operators really to be able to display and do that type of information, right? As well as like data management. What data do we need? What are some additional things? I tried to explain it to somebody the other day about what I kind of do as a SIGINT development analyst, right? And I've always equated them to kind of the hippies of intelligence because we sit around trying to figure out. But you really want to find out the difference between the people that work in this environment and everything else. Is if you hand your mom your phone or your wife a phone, where do they go? What do? They go, hey, that's a great phone. We hand one of us this device, and we go, how can I use this? What can I get off of this? How do I break it? How do I remake it? How do I repurpose it? How do I get information on here? How do I make something that can communicate it with it and everything else? That's what we need our future guys to be able to do, right? And that's not something you can train people on. That's just something that comes natural to them, right? And then, right, futures command integration. I mentioned it also earlier. We're going to need to have the futures command and CEMA, right, and cyber, Army cyber work hand in hand, right, to build in those core components of what CEMA needs to be able to do their operations and what the future command is going to need to go out and work with industry and the other partners to really bring back the information and develop the tools and stuff that our future warriors are going to need, right? They're going to be, there's 6 focus areas right now are long-range precision fires, right? Next generation combat vehicles, future vehicle, vertical lift platforms, right? The next generation helicopters, mobile and expeditionary Army networks, right? Air and missile defense capabilities, and soldier lethality, right? CEMA needs to be built into each one of those. You can those 6 general statements, you can immediately go, oh, there's going to be some IoT touch point that can either be used against them as a deterrence against their use, or we're going to need to embed something in it to be able to go after those pieces, right? So have that. In conclusion, right, there are many, many, many other areas of IoT discussions we could have and CEMA discussions. It's not, it wasn't meant to be a super technical or highly, but this is just kind of some of the things I've thought of and been looking at over the past 6 months or so. about this. I would highly encourage you to go out and start looking at it. The industry as a whole, our group, the Navy and the IC as a whole, is really trying to come to grips with IoT and its integration and what we're going to do with it, right? It's also, right, an ever-changing, technology, and the demands on us and our operators are going to have to be, again, that agile response. Today we know what the technology is going to be, the protocol is going to be used. We kind of have an idea of the protocols or the languages we need to manipulate that data, but that could all change within a month or two, right? That can change within 6 months. So we're going to need people who are, and capabilities that can really take in and change and move slowly, or not move slowly, but move quickly along with those changes. That's one of the biggest things we've always had a problem with, right? And the DoD and the IC is the technology moves faster than we can field capabilities, or that we can get people trained up to counter those capabilities. We need to move closer into getting them right alongside of it and having people, special operators that can do those types of things, right? Does anybody have any questions? Any comments? Yeah.
So I have a question. So obviously with Internet of Technology, they're more concerned about availability than confidentiality or
Right.
integrity. So what is the most common, breach, or is there more often than not, this is the type of thing that happens and that's compromised? Do you see any trends in that?
Not right now, because I think the adversaries are still looking at that, and we'll see the expansion of those as we move along, and especially since they're starting to grow even more. Some of the things we've seen increased is everybody likes to say Bitcoin, or not Bitcoin, but blockchain, right? So we see like blockchain jacking and those types of things, and how do we get a device, Amazon device, or even your light bulb to steal your Bitcoins? That'd be a really novel thing to do, right? Put my light bulb in your house or in your hallway of your apartment to steal all your stuff. I think our adversaries and even us, we're trying to figure out how do we do those things. There was the sheer volume of devices. You think of 62,000 devices in a network. If I was to take over control of those and make every light bulb in that network, my part of my botnet, I could launch a denial of service attack from it. So those things, I think that we'll start seeing that expand out. Any other questions?
How much longer do we have before CPEs, before we get our hour?
You're at 58 minutes and 33 seconds. So I can talk.
You mentioned adversary and civilian uses, and especially when you talk about blocking or jamming ZigBee or
ZWave?
ZWave. So, and I get the impression, we could have backend networks that still allow people to communicate or do destructive things as we're moving into those areas. But you talked about how do we jam those and not affect the little old lady who's getting her oxygen or whatever.
Right.
Are there any studies that would indicate that she would actually be affected? I mean, if we're talking about if she's getting updates as opposed to equipment stoppage.
There have been studies on it, but that's where I don't think we're still quite in full understanding of how that is going to be affected. How do we shut down networks that are in close proximity to each other, that one is an adversarial network, or even not even an adversary, but something we want to protect against, and also make availability of other things that we don't want to affect at all. That really, we have precision weapons now, precision kinetic weapons that we can do things with, but we don't have precision cyber or precision EW things that we can say, I need to shut down the city block, but only for these types of devices that I know my adversary has, right? 1 hour on the dot. Any questions? Well, there's a lot. We're looking at our operators and stuff, learning, streaming analytics, map reduction, those types of things to manipulate and reduce the volumes of data as it comes into them. But there's still kind of a precipice where they sit at on how much data do they need to make the correct decision, right? Where are sensors deployed to, right, in the battlefield to collect enough information to provide that type of data so they can do their long-term analytics or even short-term analytics to drive that, and having an understanding of what data they may be missing even still, to be able to tell the commander or their operations developers that we just don't know about this. We think from other environments we've seen this, to make those educated guesses to say this is what will probably happen. Right.
And how is this hitting our allies as well as us? What are our allies seeing quite the expansion of data? I know we are in the U.S. Where are our allies in this?
The exact same place. So as those devices and everything else deploy out and more consumers take it up and start using it, they'll be faced with the same thing. And if you look at some of the larger countries, like, you take, for instance, China right now, how many people they have and how many devices they're deployed and how many things that they're doing and communicating and generating data with, those types of environments are going to be even worse. India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, as they wrap up stuff, Middle East.
So I think the kind of paring it down a little bit to say which decision maker are we talking about and what's being done for that particular decision maker in their position. So if you're looking at an 06 and 06 command in charge of the brigade, the Army's established a CEMA cell, right? So the job of that CEMA cell is to organize and collect the information about the mission required communications and information gathering and materials that they have out there, and then showing that to that brigade commander as, okay, here are your Army Battle Command systems, whatever term you want to use, and here's the ones that are at risk, and here's the environment that we're going into, here's the nation state actor that we're going against, here's their capabilities against each one of those particular devices or systems that we need, and here's the risk of you losing this, and then what happens if you lose that? What are your fallback? What are your case plan? Going through all that, that's the CEMA cell's job, is to integrate all that into something, small enough and easy enough for that particular decision maker to make decisions as to how to support my mission and how to protect my force
Right.
at the same time, right? And then on top of that, the intelligence preparation of the battlefield folks at command higher than him should be giving him enough information about the civil works, that are run by IoT devices, the power, the gas, the water, in whatever, kinetic environment that he's going to be in, and to say, okay, here's all those things, and then here's what's going on with the civil society in that community,
Yep.
and how they run their operation. All of that has to be integrated into that CEMA cell, and that CEMA cell has to be trusted by that commander before they ever go into any operation like
Oh,
that
yeah.
ever before, right? So if you're the CEMA cell leader, that's where you got to be out front, and you got to be honest with your commander about everything that you're doing. Okay, so how does that translate into industry? Is industry starting to see that they need a CEMA cell? Right? I've got all these IoT things that are running my business, so I need a CEMA cell. Where am I going to get trained CEMA cell people? How am I going to get them from the military? Eventually, they're going to rotate out.
Yep.
They're going to come to work for me. That's what we're doing. It's educating decision makers on all these different systems and how to trust them and where they're at risk. And then CEMA cell along with network provider protect them.
Right.
Fun mission part.
Yep. That's pretty much right on the head. Yep. So.
It's in Doc Martens. It's in Doc Martens somewhere.
You're spot on because the commanders, the decision makers need to know what they need to do the job.
Yep.
And then then the guys like myself down in the trenches, they need to know the commander's intent on what he needs to get the job done. All that other stuff is fluff, but I just need to know what I need to make a decision to go after the bad guys.
Absolutely. So, you're the enabler that's working to make sure that the trigger pull and throw that are in the right places.
Well, like the question though, was talking about the volumes of data. Where do you house all that data at? Yeah.
So, what data
Yeah.
do you need to perform your mission and at what level?
Yeah.
And those decisions are being made beyond
Yeah.
beyond this room, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But, when you're going into that
I mean, that's some of the things that we have to start talking about and looking at doing everything else. And our adversaries, I mean, they have the luxury of not having to deal with all that data sometimes, right? So we look at novel approaches or using an IoT device for situational awareness. If I have a Nest in my house, right, and it detects when somebody comes in and sends me an alert on my phone, I know when you're in my house, I know when to set off the charge, right? An operator goes in the house, all I gotta do is wait for my AC to kick on. Hey, somebody's home, bam, it gone. So our operators need to understand those types of things too. When we go in and do operations, we go in and we clear a house, or we go in and pull things out, what do we need to pull out, right? Before it would be like hard drives or a cell phone. But what else is in that room that can provide intelligence that can give us insight into those different things? So, and what about the neighbor's house? And what about the house behind that house? They might have data on them and might be able to provide situational awareness and operation support to the adversary just as well as us.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying if we're going to empower those
Uh,
special operators, and then they call from a text
yeah.
that shuts down that data flow, then
Yeah. Yep.
that's huge responsibility on that one single individual.
Yep. No, completely agree. So, anybody else?
I will say that if any of you want to talk to some of the AFCEA folks that are around, one of the things that they're trying to do is bring the same type of discussion into Homeland Security. And how do we take this into Homeland Security, especially as y'all start getting out of the military and start going to some of these other organizations. If you can find ways to help them and bring this discussion onto them, this will sure help us a lot. And I know AFCEA is looking at this. How do we help other people out there, especially in Homeland Security?
Awesome. I hope everybody enjoyed it and got something out of it and picked up a little something and maybe help provoke some thoughts and discussions later on. So, 4:29.
We're right at the time.
There you go.
By the time that you start checking out, it'll be right at 4:30.
Everybody can go.